silent room, if you press your ear against a pillow, you can hear your own heartbeat. To a child, that muffled, rhythmic pulse often sounds like soft footsteps on a carpeted floor. Children are experts at rationalizing terrifying sensory inputs into harmless concepts, creating a protective layer between themselves and the world they don't yet understand. Years later, an adult began documenting a series of these disjointed childhood memories. He was attempting to stitch together fragments of his past to explain a lingering sense of unease, unaware that he was actually recording the history of a lifelong obsession. As a kid, the events seemed like isolated, unfortunate accidents. He once woke up deep in the woods with no memory of how he got there. He found a forged runaway note on his pillow. Later, he participated in a school balloon project that resulted in a strange, silent correspondence. Viewed through an adult perspective, these dots connect into a coordinated campaign. The boy who woke up in the forest had been carried there while he slept. The runaway note was a calculated forgery meant to explain his disappearance. The balloon project wasn't a game. It was the moment a predator established a line of contact. This tension between innocent memory and objective reality creates the sensation of retroactive dread. The horror of Penpal isn't about a threat that is coming. It's about the realization that the threat was already there, hiding in the gaps of a child's understanding. The escalation began in kindergarten. The child attached a note to a balloon, and weeks later he received a response. But inside there were no letters, only Polaroids. One showed a blurry patch of desert. Another captured the top corner of a building, distorted by a lens flare. The adult eventually noticed two details the child ignored. The envelopes had no postmarks, meaning they were hand-delivered to the school. And in the deep background of every single photo, behind a tree or at the edge of a crowd, you can see the boy himself. He was being photographed without his knowledge. This proximity extended to his own home. He and his friend Josh once explored the dark crawl space beneath his abandoned house to find a lost cat. They found bowls of food and a moldy blanket, believing they had stumbled onto a squatter's nest. His mother had sold that house and moved them across the city because she found that same blanket and those same bowls of food while they still lived there. The stalker had been living in the dirt directly beneath the boy's bedroom for months, conditioning the family cat to visit him so that the boy would eventually follow. The stalker infiltrated the boy's sanctuary, turning the home into a vantage point. The predator didn't need to break in. He had already established a permanent presence within the perimeter. The stalker also tracked the boy's movements in the woods. During a map-making expedition, the boy and Josh heard constant mechanical snapping and crunching in the brush. They were children, so they convinced themselves they were being followed by a robot. During a panicked flight from the woods after dark, they dropped their map in the water. That night, the protagonist found a piece of paper tucked into his back pocket. He assumed it was a prank by Josh. The predator had retrieved the dropped map from the water, drawn himself holding hands with the child, and physically approached the boy in the dark to slip it back into his pocket without being felt. This campaign eventually ensnared the neighbors. Mrs. Maggie, an elderly woman with Alzheimer's, began joyfully telling the boys that her husband, Tom, had finally come home. Tom had been dead for years, but she was no longer living alone. The stalker had murdered Mrs. Maggie, hidden her body in black bags, and moved into her house. He used her diseased mind to provide him with a permanent home and a direct line of sight into the boy's life. The predator exploited every vulnerability, a lost map, a decaying mind, a lonely house, to collapse the distance between himself and his target. Years later, as a teenager, the protagonist reconnected with Josh's older sister, Veronica. The two began dating, unaware that the shadow from his childhood was still trailing him. After a midnight movie, a dark sedan with a shattered rear window accelerated toward Veronica, striking her in the parking lot. As she lay dying, she whispered that the driver had taken her picture. This tragedy shared a direct link with the protagonist's childhood best friend. At a 12th birthday party, Josh had been pale and withdrawn, claiming he had been sleepwalking. Shortly after that, he vanished. Years later, Josh's body was found buried in the woods, wrapped in the stalker's distinct crawlspace blanket. He was clutching a photograph of the protagonist. The two boys were nearly identical in height, build, and hair color. Losing access to his primary target, the predator kidnapped Josh as a substitute, keeping him alive just long enough to force him into the role of the person he truly obsessed over. Penpal is a narrative of survivor's guilt. It illustrates how the mind hides traumatic truths to protect the innocence of childhood, truths that, once revealed, show that the protagonist's survival was paid for by